Hello, my name is Mariah Hoy, and this video will provide a brief overview of the NINDS Early Career Rigor Champions Prize. The Office of Research Quality within the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke is launching the NINDS Early Career Rigor Champions Prize. I will briefly explain what led to this initiative and then provide more details on the submission process as well as the evaluation mechanism, followed by a series of frequently asked questions. The NINDS Office of Research Quality is dedicated to promoting experimental and analytical rigor, measures to reduce bias, transparent reporting, and high-quality scientific research. If you'd like to learn more, I've included the link to our webpage as well as a QR code. What do we mean by research quality and rigorous research practices? To clarify, I'm going to outline various rigor practices along the research life cycle. In the first stage, you're evaluating existing evidence and generating hypotheses. Then you start planning your experimental design. Rigorous research practices in this phase would include things like calculating your sample size to make sure your experiments will be adequately powered, having plans for blinding or masking of experimenters, as well as plans for randomization of samples, and defining exclusion criteria. In the next stage, you're conducting experiments and collecting data. This is where you would follow through on those plans to blind or mask experimenters and to randomize samples, as well as handle outliers on the basis of those predefined exclusion criteria. In the analysis and interpretation phase, you're starting to make inferences from your data, using the appropriate statistics, and then preventing p-hacking or harking, hypothesizing after results are known. And then in the publishing and reporting phase, this is where you want to make sure that you're transparently reporting all of your methodologies, including those measures to mitigate unconscious bias, that you're displaying data transparently, and publishing null results to help reduce publication bias. Now, after going through some rigor practices along the research lifecycle, when we start a new line of inquiry and evaluate the quality of the existing evidence, it should be on the basis of adherence to those rigor practices. Were prior experiments more exploratory and preliminary, or were they confirmatory, in which case these practices, such as blinding and masking of experimenters and randomizing samples, should really have been employed. You can go to the link below to see more examples of rigor and transparency practices, and this link is also in the video description. Why do we need an Office of Research Quality to help increase attention to rigor? Well, the problem is that the current incentive structure is not necessarily aligned with what we should value. What we should value is high-quality research, which is rooted in practices like transparent reporting, measures to reduce bias, like blinding or masking of experimenters, using the appropriate data handling, and then publication of both positive as well as null results. And yet, how we evaluate research and researchers is largely based on bibliometrics. Things like the number of publications an investigator has, the impact factor of the journal in which those papers were published, the amount of grant funding an investigator has, or their H-index, or the number of citations garnered by those publications. And thus, what we value is not necessarily aligned with how we evaluate researchers. Ultimately, realigning incentives with our values requires culture change, but this misalignment is present across all sectors of the scientific ecosystem, and so no one group can change the culture in isolation. Following a workshop in 2018, we and attendees proposed establishing communities of rigor champions across all sectors of the scientific ecosystem to lead grassroots efforts to change the culture and enhance attention to rigor and transparency. You can read more in this eLife 2020 paper. What does it mean to be a rigor champion? We define a rigor champion as someone from any career stage or scientific sector who is driving awareness of or improvements in rigorous research practices or transparent reporting, regardless of how big or small the effort. Rigor champions can come again from all career stages and sectors, including undergraduates, staff scientists, educators, librarians, core facility managers, etc. However, we know work in this space often goes unrecognized and doesn't necessarily provide career incentives. And thus, we need to create incentives and rewards for promoting research quality. To this end, in 2023, we launched the NINDS Rigor Champions Prize. The purpose of the prize was just to recognize individuals or small teams who had promoted or enhanced research rigor and transparency and had already contributed to changing the culture of science. Last March, we announced the winners of the prize, which I've listed here, and you can read more about their activities on our webpage. For the next iteration of the Rigor Champions Prize, we wanted to tailor the prize specifically to early career scientists, who we perceive to be very active in this space. And thus, we are launching the NINDS Early Career Rigor Champions Prize. For the purposes of this prize, we define early career as anyone currently in a training position, including undergraduates, post-baccalaureates, graduate students, postdoctoral scholars, and clinical fellows, as well as any other member of the scientific community who is within 3 years of starting their first post-training position. This could be independent faculty, staff scientists, administrators, industry scientists, etc. At a glance, the NINDS Early Career Rigor Champions Prize, the purpose, again, is to recognize and reward early career rigor champions who are promoting enhanced research rigor and raising awareness of these practices with the intent of trying to change others' research practices as well. In terms of eligibility, individuals or small teams of up to 3 individuals of early career rigor champions are eligible to apply. Of note, the entire team must meet the designated definition of early career in order to be eligible. Submission deadline is May 2nd, 2025 at 11:59 p.m. EDT. For prizes, up to $50,000 total in cash prizes will be awarded. This includes up to 2 awards of $10,000 each, 3 awards of $5,000 each, and 6 awards of $2,500 each. The submission process is fairly straightforward. You need to submit a completed participant registration and consent form, respond to 6 prompts in the essay PDF. Each prompt ranges from 1,500 to 2,500 characters each, or approximately 200 to 350 words each. You can also submit an optional other PDF that has links or any other material evidence of your described activities. How is this prize different from a grant? Grants are awarded for future activities, so things that you're proposing to do. They're awarded to institutions and they're mostly limited to principal investigators. Grants are reviewed by panels of scientists and the funds are restricted for research use. However, in the case of this challenge, awards will actually be made on the basis of past activities, so things that you've already done. Awards will be made to individuals or small teams of up to 3 individuals. This challenge is open to the public, anyone who meets the eligibility criteria, and this challenge will be reviewed by federal employees. And the monetary awards are actually unrestricted. Another major difference is that in the case of this challenge, the submission is much shorter than your typical grant. Again, we're really just asking for you to respond to 6 prompts, which are 1,500 to 2,500 characters each. This is the NINDS Early Career Rigor Champions Prize webpage. I've included the link, which is also in the video's description. Be sure to follow the challenge for updates and reminders. The Overview tab contains all of the information about the purpose and the goals of the prize, as well as some examples of responsive and non-responsive activities under this prize. In the introduction, I gave an overview of rigor practices along the research lifecycle, but here I'm going to walk through some example activities that help promote awareness of those important rigor practices. This is not an exhaustive list, and responsive activities are not limited to this list, but some examples of activities that would be responsive to this challenge include journal clubs and seminars focused on discussing principles of rigorous research, presentations focused on methodology rather than just results, lectures, webinars, and workshops encouraging improved experimental design, changes to policy or procedures that better reward high-quality research, and activities that promote the importance of disseminating rigorously performed null studies. On the flip side, activities that would not be responsive to this challenge include activities that are focused on specific techniques that are not broadly applicable to biomedical science, including neuroscience, practices that are relevant to open science without an explicit focus on rigor. For example, for open science and data sharing activities to be responsive, they must also emphasize the importance of how the data were obtained and sharing of the appropriate metadata to assess research quality. Similarly, updated personnel practices or policies that do not incentivize higher research quality would not be responsive. So policies requiring publishing as open access or preprints must also emphasize or incentivize higher quality research in order to be responsive. Activities that are focused on researcher integrity, such as ethics or misconduct, are not responsive to this challenge. And then finally, activities that are already required by NIH policies would also not be responsive to this challenge. For further details on what the submission entails, navigate to the How to Enter tab. The submission requirements are pretty straightforward. You will submit via the challenge.gov portal. You will provide a title and a brief description of your submission. You will download and respond to the 6 fillable prompts in the essays PDF. You will also download and complete and sign the participant registration and consent form. As an option, upload a separate PDF titled Other, which can include text, hyperlinks, and any other material evidence of the described activities in your submission. Of note, this other PDF is limited to 1 page, single-spaced, with a minimum font size of 11. Importantly, please see this How to Enter tab for all details on what to include in your submission. The fillable essays PDF and the participant registration and consent form can be downloaded from the Resources tab, as I'm showing here. The prompts in the essays PDF, briefly, you will be asked to describe 1, the significance of the activity or activities. How does the activity address an important problem in scientific rigor that applies broadly to biomedical research, including neuroscience? How is the activity implemented in an appropriate and thoughtful manner for the rigor problem being addressed? Secondly, championship. How did the individual or team drive the activity outside of their typical job duties? How committed is the individual or team to promoting improved scientific rigor? And then finally, the impact of the activity. Who and how many people were affected by the activity or activities? How did the activity lead to increased awareness of or improved rigor practices? Now I will go over the other tabs, starting with the timeline. As I mentioned, May 2nd, 2025 is the submission deadline. Then eligible submissions will move into pre-screening and initial review, with high-scoring submissions moving into judging and final selection. The anticipated winner announcement date is July 11th of 2025. All of the dates listed in the timeline are subject to change. Under the Rules tab, you will find the eligibility criteria and the participation rules. Briefly, individuals in small teams of up to 3 individuals who are at least 18 years old and meet the designated definition of early career are eligible to apply. In order to be eligible for a monetary award, entries must be submitted by a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, whether as an individual or as a team lead. Teams must designate an eligible team lead who will receive the cash prize in full if selected. An entry submitted by a non-U.S. citizen or a non-permanent resident, again, whether as an individual or as a team lead, may be recognized with an honorable mention. Federal employees are not eligible to apply. And then only one entry per participant is allowed, whether submitting as an individual or as part of a team. Importantly, you can read the full eligibility criteria and participation rules under the Rules tab. The Judging tab has information on the evaluation criteria, as well as the review and judging process. Submissions will be evaluated on the following. 1, significance of the activity, importance of the rigor practice being addressed and its relevance to biomedical science, including neuroscience, and the appropriateness of the approach for the rigor problem being addressed. Championship, the participants' commitment of personal time to the activity. The participants' personal drive for promoting scientific rigor. And then finally, impact, how broadly people were reached by the activity, and then evidence of positively changing other researchers' appreciation for or use of rigorous research practices. And really critical to this challenge, it's not about simply employing rigorous research practices yourself. Your activities have to go beyond you and your own experiments. The first stage of review will involve a pre-screening for eligibility, and then only complete and eligible submissions will move forward to review. Each submission will be reviewed by at least 2 federal staff. High-scoring submissions will then enter into a judging and final selection stage. At this stage, staff may reach out to participants or team leads for references who can verify the content of the submission. And again, the anticipated winner announcement is July 11th, 2025. The FAQ, or Frequently Asked Questions tab, is a good resource if you still have lingering questions about the prize. So I will now go through some common FAQs. First off, FAQs related to eligibility. I had a career break, and so I don't meet NIH's definition of an early stage investigator. Am I still eligible to apply if I just started my faculty position? Yes. For the purposes of this challenge, we define early career as anyone in a training position or anyone who is within 3 years of starting their first post-training position. And again, the full eligibility requirements are listed under the Rules tab. I'm not technically a scientist or a researcher. Am I eligible? Yes. Anyone who is championing activities that promote enhanced attention to rigorous research practices are encouraged to apply. We recognize that many of these individuals are university staff, such as librarians and administrators, that may not be trained or practicing scientists. Am I eligible to apply if I have received prior federal funding for the activity that would be described in my submission? As long as federal funds are not used to develop the submission itself, that being the fillable PDF forms and other required documentation for challenge.gov, then yes, you may submit an entry, assuming all of the other eligibility requirements are met. However, it should be noted that as part of the championship essays, we do ask participants to describe any resources or support that they received for the activity. So any financial support, federal or otherwise, should be disclosed there. Okay, now moving on to FAQs related to the submission content. What is meant by rigorous research practices? NIH defines scientific rigor as the strict application of the scientific method to ensure unbiased and well-controlled experimental design, methodology, analysis, interpretation, and reporting of results. Rigorous research practices would include things like minimizing unconscious bias, so blinding or masking of experimenters, randomizing samples, predefining criteria for data exclusions, etc. Justifying sample sizes, and then using genuine replicates as opposed to pseudo-replicates. And also identifying exploratory and confirmatory components of a study, etc. And again, you can see the NINDS guidance page linked in the description for more information. What is meant by raising awareness of rigorous research practices for others? How many people need to be impacted? Critical to this challenge is evidence of raising awareness of rigorous research practices with the intent of trying to change others' research practices and not simply employing rigorous research practices in your own experiments. The number of people impacted could be members of one's own laboratory or an entire department or program. Career stage will be considered when evaluating the impact of an activity. What kinds of evidence of improved rigor practices should I report in the impact essays prompt? Any qualitative or quantitative evidence of improved rigor practices by individuals outside of the participants should be reported. For example, one could describe improved rigor practices associated with the activity via surveys, personal feedback, number of participants in the program or activity, levels of behavioral implementation, for example, reporting levels of rigorous research practices in publications, or updated policy handbook. Does the activity described in my submission have to relate directly to neuroscience research? Implemented activity and the targeted rigorous research practices should be broadly applicable to biomedical research, including neuroscience. However, activities do not have to have been implemented directly in a neuroscience setting. The broad applicability to biomedical science, including neuroscience, should be described in the significance essay prompt. If I was involved in more than one activity, should I describe all of the activities? Because the essays are limited in length, it may be easier for participants to focus on one main activity that led to enhanced awareness or practice of research rigor, particularly for the significance and impact prompts. However, the championship prompts allow for longer descriptions of the participants' motivations for championing rigor more broadly. Therefore, this space would be the most appropriate place to give a more holistic view of all of your efforts and activities. What can I include in the other PDF? The other PDF can include text, hyperlinks, or images that provide direct evidence of the activities described in the submission. For example, you may provide a list of literature cited, links to media articles about the implementation efforts and outcomes of the activity, links to or direct inclusion of evaluation instruments, images, graphs, or other data visualizations, and really any other material evidence of the activities and outcomes described in the submission. However, this other PDF is not meant as a space to describe new activities that were not included in the submission. Okay, now FAQs related to submission logistics. What if I want to change my submission? What should I do? Submissions can be modified through the challenge.gov portal until the submission deadline. The submission will need to be resubmitted through the portal, but it will keep the same submission number. Be sure to check whether you've submitted all the requested information, because incomplete submissions will not be judged. And again, after the deadline, no changes can be made. Who can I ask about eligibility, logistics, or whether my submission fits the prize? You can submit questions using the contact form on the challenge website, and we will provide feedback. Please allow sufficient time to receive a response. Do not wait until the last minute to submit inquiries. Where can I learn more about the prize and the NINDS Office of Research Quality? Again, here is the link to the challenge webpage, which is also in the video description. And here's the link to the Office of Research Quality's webpage, as well as a QR code. And then you can join the conversation by following us on X or subscribing to our monthly newsletter. I highly encourage you all to apply. We really want to recognize you for championing research rigor. Oh, and again, don't forget the deadline, May 2nd, 2025 at 11:59 p.m. EDT. Thanks.